Good day. We are the group one, and today we are going to discuss the topic under the first course outcome of the life and works of Rizal. So, next slide. Here we have the table of contents of the topics that we are going to present. Next slide. So, our first topic is the theory of nationalism. Next slide, please. First, uh, let's define first the two words, the nation and nationalism. So when we say nation, it is an integration of a territorial state with a political structure that administers the society. Nationalism, it is a system wherein it aims to achieve and to nurture self-governance that administers society. Its significance is to maintain the preservation of the national identity in language, race, culture, and religion. So a sense of national consciousness, uh, exalting one nation alone above all others, and placing primary emphasis on promotion of its culture and interests as opposed to those of other nations or supranational groups. Right? Here are the factors in the early development of Rizal's nationalism. First, we have he emphasizes the importance of the Tagalog language. So he was able to acquire his education from Spanish school, allowing him to nurture skills and talents that emphasizes the importance of the Tagalog language. Next, he was openly criticized by the friars. The dilemma that Rizal faced was depicted in his two famous novels, The Noli Me Tangere and The El Filibusterismo. He defended Filipino civil rights, Filipinization in churches, and equal rights equality were among the requests made by Rizal to the Spanish government. He discovered the power of the pen. Rizal's writing made a huge impact on the minds of the native who wished to break free from the abuses of the Spaniards. And lastly, we have he conceived a form of gradual nationalism. Please. So we have our own research about what is nationalism. So according to Anderson 1983, it is that all pervading spirit that binds together men of diverse castes and creeds, clans and colors, and unites them into one people, one family, one nation with common aspiration and ideas. Next, we have the Rizal's nationalism. This is composed of the people, common traits, hospitality, close family, high respect for elders, sense of pakikisama, loyalty, jealousy, and patriotistic.
For master narratives, Noli Me Tangere is not just a literary piece, but it serves as a foundation text that molds the national identity, portraying colonial rule, defining the enemy, also known as the Spanish government, and to encourage actions for independence. And next one is for the community conjoined up by Dr. Jose Rizal. This means that Rizal's novel Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo played a crucial role in shaping Philippine nationalism by revealing the injustice, corruption, and abuse of power by the Spanish colonial governments and the friars. Next slide, please. And for Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo as a founding text of Philippine nationalism, the novels of Jose Rizal created a recognizable and knowable Filipino community. They shape a narrative that defined the emergence of modern nation while exposing the injustices of colonial society. This community is knowable in the sense that it engages with the ethical and political decisions, allowing Filipino to reflect on their identity, and speak to one another about their shared experiences. And for the promised freedom, um, this means that to give the awareness and consciousness of their situation during the colonial rule and provide the group groundwork to the modern Filipino society. And then the Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo changed the history of the nation. Jose Rizal's novels Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo had a power impact on Philippine history. Through his writings, Rizal awakened the minds and hearts of Filipino by revealing the harsh realities of Spanish colonial rule, such as injustice, abuse, and corruptions. And this his story inspired a strong sense of nationalism and the love for the country, especially among the youth and educated class. This growing national awareness played a key role in uniting Filipinos and encouraging them to take part in the anti-colonial movement, ultimately paving the way of the Philippine Revolution. Next slide, please. For the existence of competing European and colonial powers, Jose Rizal's novels Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo did more than just stories. They tackled the difficult task of defining what it meant to be a Filipino. Through the growth and development of his characters and their struggles, Rizal introduced the idea of a Filipino nation that was united and capable of change.
The 19th century Philippines in Rizal's context. Have you ever wondered what kind of world our national hero Jose Rizal was born into? Jose Rizal was a Filipino writer, doctor, and nationalist. He is known as one of the key figures who helped inspire the Filipino people to fight for change during the Spanish colonial period. During his time, the Philippines was under Spanish rule. Filipinos were treated unfairly. They were called indios and were seen as second class citizens. The ones who really held power were the Spanish officials and friars, especially the Catholic Church, which had control over education, land, and even people's daily lives. But not all Filipinos stayed silent. A group called the Ilustrados, or the Filipinos who were educated, some even abroad, started to speak up. Rizal was part of this group. They didn't call for war but for reforms, and they wanted better treatment, equal rights, and a voice in how the country was run. Rizal believed that the way to fight back was through education and writing, and that's how he started his role in this movement.
Am I audible ba? Okay. So there are various important events happening during this time. For example, the Suez Canal, and it basically exposed or showed Filipinos the concept of independence and national identity. Along with the Industrial French and American Revolution, these three are also important because it paved the way for innovation and progress. Next slide, please. Okay, so regarding the society, there's a hierarchy. So we will start from highest to lowest. The highest one being the Spaniards, who gets the best pay and jobs. The next ones are the Chinese mestizos, who are really known for their business. And the second to lowest is the Ilustrados, or basically the educated Filipinos. And the lowest being the Indios, or the native ones, who gets the demanding work. And regarding the religion and government, religion has a lot of power, specifically the friars, and religion and government cooperate with each other to keep people in check, which is the reason anti-clericalism keeps developing and growing, or the hatred for the church's power.
So, what sparked Filipino nationalism? What would make a peaceful person like Rizal decide to speak out against a powerful government? There were several key events that pushed Rizal and many others to speak out against the Spanish government. One was was when Governor General de la Torre, or General de la Torre, introduced liberal reforms. At first, this gave Filipinos hope, but later on, it caused backlash from the Spanish who didn't want change. Then, in 1872, the Cavite Mutiny happened. It was a small uprising of Filipino workers and soldiers, but the Spanish overreacted. They blamed it on the people who weren't even involved, including the three priests, Gomez, Burgos, and Zamora, known as Gomburza. They were executed unfairly, and this deeply shocked and angered many Filipinos, including Rizal. Aside from that, Filipinos were suffering under colonial rule. They were forced to work without pay, couldn't own land freely, and were often treated unfairly by the legal system. The Spanish friars also owned huge lands while many Filipinos lived in poverty. All these injustices pushed Rizal to act, but not with violence. He believed in using peaceful methods to fight back. That's why he wrote his famous novels Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo. These books exposed the abuse, corruption, and unfair treatment happening under the Spanish rule. Through his writing, Rizal opened the eyes of Filipinos and helped them realize that they deserve justice and change.
Let us now move on to the third part, which is the Rizal's cultural roots, the ascendance of Chinese mestizo. Next slide, please. In the late 16th century, a large Chinese colony formed in the Philippines. These early settlers worked mainly as traders, artisans, and domestic workers. Eventually, the Spanish colonial government officially recognized Binondo, established by Governor Dasmariñas, which is as a permanent settlement for Chinese mestizos, those of mixed Chinese and Filipino descent. As we all know today, Binondo became the world's oldest Chinatown and an economic center for Chinese Filipinos.
So, who were considered as Chinese mestizos during the 19th century? In the 19th century, anyone born of a Chinese father and an Indio mother was considered a Chinese mestizo. This classification came with both privileges and burdens, often granting better access to education and business. But who were not considered Chinese mestizo? First, children born to a Chinese mother and Indio father were not officially recognized as Chinese mestizo. Second, full-blooded Chinese. And lastly, children of Chinese and Spanish parents, because they are classified as Spanish mestizos. Their significance is huge, and they were key to social and cultural impact. As mentioned in the previous slide, they bridged native and foreign cultures, helping spread Chinese, Spanish, and native Filipino influences. Their mixed heritage gave them access to education and wealth, which allowed them to influence society more than most native Filipinos. And they dominated local trade, agriculture, and business in areas like Binondo and other key towns in Manila. They formed the early entrepreneurial class and later became the backbone of the Filipino middle class. They also are the key to the political and national identity. Because of their education and resources, many became leaders in the reform and revolutionary movements. Their status gave them a unique perspective, seen as both insiders and outsiders, making them effective critics of colonial rule. And lastly, they are key to notable contributions. They produced nationalist figures, including Jose Rizal, who was himself a Chinese mestizo, which will be further explained on the next slide.
Rizal's ancestry came from Shonke village in Fujian, China, near the old trading port of Zaiton. Rizal had Chinese blood from his great-grandfather, Domingo Lamco, and during the Spanish period, they had a bigger impact than Spanish mestizos for three main reasons. First, there were a lot more of them, around 240,000 by the mid 1800s, while there were only about 7,000 to 10,000 Spanish mestizos. Second, they mixed in more easily with Filipino society. Third, they were more active in business, politics, and community life.
Okay, so we will now discuss the last two topics. But firstly, we will present agrarian relations, including its origin and modern standing. We will also tackle the issue regarding fire lands. But regarding the agrarian lands, this was mentioned in the presentation earlier, the exploitation of labor and land rent of Filipinos. And in this topic, we will discuss the issue of agrarian lands in detail. So, pa-next po. To give context muna, let's first establish the general definition of agrarian reform. Agrarian reform pertains to the redistribution of land ownership, particularly landless farm workers, as a means to practice rights. And as we know, human rights are commonly overlooked and abused, leading to mass expression in ways of complaints or rebellion. The agrarian reform was an attempt to evenly distribute land, especially to those who devote labor in agriculture. Now, pa-next po muna pala, sorry. Let's consider the differences in land ownership before and during colonization. And so, during the pre-colonial period, the pre-Spanish rule, lands in the country were utilized communally. Land was utilized by the community evenly, and private ownership was not observed and practiced. Next slide po. However, during the Spanish rule, private ownership became vast. In the country, the encomienda system was introduced, and the estates were referred to as haciendas. The land ownership was governed by the Spaniards with Filipinos as the tenants, which meant that they had been paying rent of high rates. Economic imbalance, as a consequence of widespread landlessness, had been continuous even during the American rule. Next slide po. So here we have the CARP, the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program. This is considered to be the most impactful implementation made regarding the issue of land distribution. This was implemented under former President Corazon Aquino, and this bill's objective was to distribute 8.1 million hectares of land to landless farmers and other farm workers. But due to the vast private ownership, this implementation received great resistance. Considering trial delays or even legal gaps, private landowners still recognize ways to evade this. Next po. So, as established, CARP implementation was flawed and kind of slow. And because of its degree of evasion being somehow simple, it could also be said the bill had been inefficient. In the modern day, agrarian reform still faces similar issues, like farmers struggling to represent themselves in claiming land ownership delay. Strict implementations which focus on land ownership transparency should be implemented to help mend the issue regarding land distribution. And another implementation which should be made to help is one which moderates urbanization, since urbanization lessens land to be distributed. So let's move on na po to friar lands.
So moving on, let us discuss the friar lands in the Philippines, what they are, their origins, and why they are important to tackle. So during the Spanish rule, large agricultural estates were controlled by religious orders such as the Dominicans, Agustinians, and Franciscans, and the Recollects. These lands were mostly located in the provinces of Cavite, Laguna, Bulacan, and Rizal. The friars acquired them through donations, coercions, or purchase. These Filipino tenants cultivated them. Over time, resentment grew among Filipinos because of these estates represented colonial control, abuse of power, and landlessness for the native population. So next slide po. So after the Spain ceded the Philippines to the United States in 1898, the issue of friar lands became a national concern. Many Filipinos called for the redistribution of these lands, the farmers who work on them. In response, the American colonial government enacted the Friar Lands Act or Act number 1120 in 1903. Through this, the government bought around 166,000 hectares of friar-owned land and resold them to the Filipino tenants through the installment payments. However, many poor farmers were unable to afford the land or complete their payments. That leads to continued dominance of wealthy landlords in rural areas. Despite the reform, next slide please. The friar lands issues left a lasting impact on the Philippine agrarian landscape. It exposed the inequality in land ownership and sparked discussions that led to various land reform programs, including the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program or CARP. Despite these reforms, land distribution remains a challenge, with many farmers still lacking ownership of the lands they till. So next slide, please. Understanding the friar lands issues reminds us how deeply rooted the land inequality problem is in our history and how colonial policies continue to affect Filipino society today. We see that colonial impacts are indeed enduring. With this, we conclude our presentation. Thank you, and we hope that you provided enough substantial takeaways for reflection. Again, we are the Group 1.